Her bodyguard had one job: get the billionaire heiress out of the dive bar and back to her penthouse. But at 2:17 in the morning, she wasn't leaving, not without the man behind the counter, the single dad bartender who'd shown her one moment of genuine kindness, and that decision would shatter the invisible wall between their two worlds forever. Her name was Isabella Thorne, heir to a $30 billion empire. His name was Michael, a widower working the graveyard shift to support his daughter. In that dim bar, a 5-minute conversation about lost dreams and cheap whiskey sparked something that defied every rule of money, power, and love. And with one impossible demand, she was about to force a confrontation that neither her family nor his reality could survive. To understand why a 5-minute conversation could detonate two lives, you need to see the worlds they came from. Isabella Thorne's life was a gilded cage, scheduled down to the minute by family office handlers. Her diary wasn't just appointments. It was a tactical map for merging the Thorne fortune with old European nobility. At 28, her primary objective, as her father's advisors coldly termed it, was to secure a strategic marriage. Her past relationships had been vetted, her friendships approved, every public appearance calculated for brand alignment. The one thing never on the agenda was authenticity. Meanwhile, 45 minutes away in a neighborhood where rent was always 2 weeks late, Michael finished tucking his 7-year-old daughter Lily into bed. His world was built on a different kind of calculus: the cost of groceries against the remaining balance in his checking account, the hours of his bartending shift at the last call measured against Lily's daycare fees. A former architecture student, his dreams had been buried 4 years earlier under medical debt after his wife's long illness. Now, his life was a closed loop of work, fatherhood, and survival. The black vest he wore for his night shift wasn't a costume. It was armor against a world that asked for too much and gave back too little. The night of November 12th was supposed to be another transaction in Isabella's portfolio. A charity gala at the museum, another photographed smile with a suitable heir from an old money family. But something snapped. Maybe it was the 1,000th hollow conversation about market volatility, or the way her father's security detail subtly herded her toward a specific Duke's son. Halfway through the dinner, she excused herself, walked past her bewildered chaperone, out a service exit, and kept walking. She hailed a cab and gave the first non-curated destination that came to mind: just drive, somewhere real. The cab dropped her outside the last call at 11:30 p.m. The flickering neon sign, the smell of stale beer and pine cleaner, the low hum of a baseball game on the TV, it was all so alien to her. She slid onto a worn vinyl stool, the red satin of her dress glaringly out of place. Michael, wiping down the bar, gave her a brief, tired glance. "Rough night?" he asked, not with the polished deference she was used to, but with a flat, genuine weariness. She ordered a whiskey neat. He poured it, slid it over, and went back to his work. No small talk, no recognition. It was the first moment of silence she'd experienced in years that wasn't lonely. 20 minutes later, a drunk regular at the end of the bar began shouting, slamming his glass. He started lumbering toward Isabella, mumbling incoherently. Her bodyguard, Leo, who had been standing rigid by the door, moved instantly, but Michael was closer. He stepped smoothly between the man and Isabella, not with aggression, but with a calm, firm authority. "Hey, Dave, time to go home, buddy. Let's get you a cab." He guided the man away, dealing with the conflict quietly, without spectacle. When he returned, he didn't ask for thanks. He just refilled her water glass and said, "Sorry about that. You okay?" That was it. That small, uncalculated act of protection, not as a job but as a reflex, punctured the sterile bubble of her existence. They started talking. She asked him why he worked nights. He spoke about Lily, about wanting to be home when she woke up. She didn't mention her last name or her net worth. For the first time in memory, someone looked at Isabella, not at the Thorne fortune. He saw a person having a rough night, and he offered a listening ear, not a business card. To him, it was just being decent. To her, it was a lifeline. At 2 a.m., Leo approached. "Miss Thorne, your car is here. We need to go." Isabella didn't look up from her glass. In a minute. 5 minutes later, Leo returned, his voice tighter. "Now, Miss Thorne, your father is calling." This was the inflection point. The machinery of her life was re-engaging, trying to pull her back into orbit. She looked at Michael, who was now watching the exchange with polite confusion. And in that moment, she made a decision that shredded the script. She pointed directly at Michael. "I'm not leaving without him." Leo froze. The handful of other patrons looked over. Michael set down the glass he was drying. "Ma'am, my shift ends at 4. I have to close up and then I have to get home to my kid." Isabella stood up, her voice clear in the quiet bar. "Then I'll wait, or you come with us now." Leo finally found his voice. "Miss Thorne, that is highly irregular, my protocols," she cut him off. "Your protocol is to keep me safe and accompany me. He's coming. So your job is to make that happen." The drive to the Thorne penthouse was conducted in a silence so thick it felt physical. Michael sat in the back of the armored luxury sedan, still in his work clothes, utterly bewildered. Isabella stared out the window, a strange calm on her face. Leo in the front passenger seat made a terse, encrypted call to the family office's head of security. The message was simple. The principal has acquired an asset, an unscreened male civilian. We are inbound. Situation is non-hostile but unconventional. At the penthouse, the late-night staff was visibly rattled. Isabella instructed them to make up a guest room. She turned to Michael. "Stay, just for tonight. Tomorrow we talk." But the Thorne family didn't wait for tomorrow. By 3:45 a.m., while Michael lay awake in a bedroom larger than his entire apartment, the machinery of immense wealth was already grinding into motion. In his downtown office, Robert Thorne IV, Isabella's father, received the full report. He didn't see a story of human connection. He saw a liability vector, a security breach, and a potential gold digger of the lowest order. With a single command, he activated a deep due diligence protocol. By sunrise, a team of private investigators would know more about Michael's life than he cared to remember himself. Every financial record, every medical bill, every past employer, every link to his deceased wife would be on a dossier on Robert Thorne's desk. The war for Isabella's future had begun, and Michael, the single dad who showed a stranger kindness, was about to be labeled the enemy. The dossier on Michael arrived at 7 a.m. Robert Thorne read it standing at his office window, his expression turning from annoyance to cold fury. It was worse than he imagined. Not a clever schemer, but something he considered more dangerous, a genuine disaster. A man with $48,000 in combined medical and credit card debt, a deceased wife, a leased car with 2 missed payments, a bartender with an unfinished architecture degree. To Robert, this wasn't a person. It was a collection of red flags screaming liability and target. He summoned his head of security, Victor Cross, a former intelligence officer with eyes like stone. "I want him neutralized, not physically. Make his life so complicated, so fraught with legal and financial headaches, that he runs back to his hole and never looks my daughter up again." Meanwhile, in the sun-drenched penthouse kitchen, Michael was experiencing a different kind of audit. He was trying to explain to a very awake, very confused Isabella why he couldn't stay for the talk. "I have to get to my daughter," he said, his voice low. "Her school starts at 8:30. My neighbor watches her before the bus, but I need to be there when she gets home this afternoon." This was a mistake. Isabella poured coffee, her movements deliberate. "Last night didn't feel like a mistake. It felt real. What's your real reason for running?" He looked at her, at the impossible opulence around them. "Look at this place. Look at you. I'm a guy who cuts off drunks and mops floors. My biggest worry today is whether the check for Lily's gymnastics class will clear. You don't just date someone like me. You adopt them, or destroy them by accident. I've seen enough destruction." But Isabella Thorne had spent a lifetime being managed. For once, she wanted to manage something herself. "Give me 1 week," she said, an unexpected steel in her voice. 1 week of real conversations. No family, no bodyguards in the room. Just you and me figuring out if last night was a fluke or something else. If after that week you walk away, I will personally ensure any complications from my family are resolved. You have my word." It was a naive offer, built on a fundamental misunderstanding of her father's reach. Michael, exhausted and strangely moved by her stubborn sincerity, made his own mistake. He agreed. The first complication arrived by noon. As Michael was helping Lily with her math homework, a certified letter came from his landlord. It cited a previously unmentioned clause about disruptive behavior and gave him 30 days to vacate his apartment. The landlord, when Michael called, was uncharacteristically blunt. "Look, it's not personal. Sometimes pressure comes from above. Take the payout and go quietly." The payout was a check for $5,000, 10 times the security deposit. It was a gentle, expensive nudge. Michael knew who was behind it. He tore the check up. The second complication was more sinister. Later that day, he received a call from the manager at the last call. His voice was apologetic. "Mike, I gotta let you go. Corporate is doing a sudden audit and your paperwork, there's some discrepancies with your reported tips. It's a whole tax thing. To avoid legal issues for you, we're terminating your position. Severance is enclosed." The severance was another check, this one for $10,000. Another nudge, harder this time. His job, his primary income, gone in a phone call. The architecture of pressure was becoming clear. Isolate him financially, make him desperate. Isabella, operating in her bubble, was facing her own pressures. Her father summoned her to a family lunch. It was not a discussion, it was a tribunal. Her mother, a socialite whose life was a curated exhibit, wept quietly into a napkin. "The rumors, Isabella. The Hayworths canceled the dinner party. They said the atmosphere was uncertain." "Do you know what that means?" Robert Thorne was direct. "This ends now. You will call this man, you will thank him for his time, and you will offer him a one-time settlement of $100,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement and never contact you again. Then you will get on a plane to Gstaad and apologize to the Von Hessens for your sudden departure." Isabella didn't cry. She looked at the portrait of her great-grandfather, the ruthless industrialist who built their fortune, hanging on the wall. "And if I refuse?" Her father's smile was thin. "Then we stop nudging and we start pushing. And we will push until there is nothing left of him to hold on to. Is that what you want? To be the cause of his ruin?" That night, against her security team's protocols, Isabella used a disposable phone to call Michael. She told him everything: the eviction, the job loss, her father's ultimatum. "He's trying to make you so unstable that you either take the money or break," she said, her voice shaky with anger. "So what's your move, Michael? Do you run?" There was a long silence on the line. Then Michael spoke, and his voice had changed. The confusion was gone, replaced by a grim resolve. "I spent 4 years watching a system fail someone I loved. Hospitals, bills, collection agencies. It's all just pressure designed to make you give up. I didn't give up then. I'm not giving up now. But I'm not fighting your father with one hand tied behind my back." What happened next shocked everyone, especially Victor Krause's investigation team. Michael didn't cash any checks. He didn't beg for his job back. He walked into a branch of a major bank the next morning, wearing his only suit, and asked for a business loan. The loan officer, seeing his debt-to-income ratio, was ready to dismiss him. But Michael didn't present a business plan for a bar or a shop. He pulled out his old architecture portfolio, digitized, updated with designs he'd sketched in his spare time. He proposed a small, sustainable firm specializing in affordable, modular housing units for lower-income families. It was niche, socially conscious, and as he argued with a passion that surprised the banker, potentially lucrative with the right angel investor. The banker was intrigued but skeptical. "Who's your angel?" Michael smiled for the first time in days. "I'm working on that." He wasn't going to Isabella for money. That was the crucial twist her father's team missed. They assumed he'd either flee or become a leech. Instead, he was trying to rebuild his own platform, to become something other than a victim. He reached out to old classmates, one of whom now worked for a non-profit urban development fund. A meeting was set. Simultaneously, Isabella made her move. She didn't go to Gstaad. She invited a select group of reporters from lifestyle and culture magazines to an informal chat at a public art gallery. With Leo a tense shadow nearby, she sat for the interview. And when the inevitable question about her uncharacteristic night out arose, she didn't deflect. She leaned in. I met someone remarkable recently. Someone who reminds me that character isn't built in boardrooms, and kindness isn't a line item on a balance sheet. My family has certain expectations, but I'm learning that the most valuable things in life can't be vetted by a committee. She didn't name Michael, but the message was a cannon shot across her father's bow. She was taking the story semi-public, framing it as a quest for authenticity against cold corporate family values. The articles that dropped later that evening were a public relations nightmare for the Thornes. Eris seeks real love in a gilded cage. Thorne scion rebels against Dynasty's matrimonial plans. Robert Thorne was apoplectic. The controlled, private pressure campaign was now threatened by public sentiment. He couldn't simply make a man disappear if that man was becoming a sympathetic figure in a media narrative his daughter was crafting. Victor Cross advised a shift in strategy. The objective remains, but the method changes. We need leverage he can't architect his way out of. We need something that attacks not his finances, but his heart. They found it 2 days later. Buried in the medical records from his wife's illness was a note from a child services evaluation conducted during the worst of the crisis. A social worker had expressed concerns about stability and ability to provide, given the medical debt and emotional distress. The case was closed after his wife's passing, deemed a tragic but resolved situation. In the hands of Thorne's legal team, however, it was a seed. A carefully worded, anonymous tip could trigger a fresh welfare check from Child Protective Services. The threat was unspoken but crystal clear: "We can touch your daughter." When Michael got the call from his neighbor that a nice lady from Family Services had come by asking questions while Lily was at school, he felt a terror colder than any financial fear. This was the line. They weren't just pushing him anymore. They were threatening the one sacred, stable part of his world. He drove to the Thorne building, demanded to see Robert Thorne, and was, of course, refused. But Leo was in the lobby. Michael walked up to him, his face pale with rage. "Tell him this. If anyone, ever comes near my daughter again with a badge or a question, the game changes. I stop trying to build something and start tearing everything down. I go to every reporter who wrote that story, and I give them names, dates, and copies of the checks his company tried to pay me off with. I turn his private war into a public scandal, so loud it drowns out every deal he's ever made. You tell him I might lose, but I will make the Thorne name synonymous with bullying a widower and his little girl." Leo delivered the message verbatim. For the first time, Robert Thorne hesitated. The brute force approach had created a cornered, unpredictable enemy. The media was already sniffing. Isabella was openly defiant, and the target had just promised mutually assured destruction. The calculus of risk was shifting. Victor Cross saw it too. "We need to redirect," he said calmly. "Isolate her from him by making him the problem in her eyes. We need to show her the chaos he brings, not through our actions but through his own world." They devised a new play. They wouldn't attack Michael directly. They would amplify the existing chaos of his life and make sure Isabella was there to witness the explosion. They knew Michael's brother-in-law, a man with his own struggles, had been asking for loans. With a subtle nudge, those requests turned into demands. With a whispered suggestion to a minor player in Michael's old neighborhood, a story was planted about Michael coming into major money from a mysterious benefactor. They were stirring the pot of his past, waiting for it to boil over right in front of Isabella. The stage was set not for a corporate ambush, but for a deeply personal, messy humiliation that would make his world look like a place she could never belong. The battle had just moved from the boardroom to the battlefield of Michael's own life, and he had no idea the trap was already sprung. Trap was baited with something Michael could never ignore: a call for help from family. His brother-in-law, David, sounded desperate on the phone. He'd gotten into a bad debt with the wrong people. He needed $3,000 by tonight, or there would be, as he put it, consequences. He asked to meet at the last call for old time's sake at 9 p.m. Michael's instincts screamed that it was a setup, but David was his late wife's brother, the last link to that part of his life. He couldn't say no. What he didn't know was that Isabella had received a separate, anonymous tip, a text from a blocked number containing only the time, the address of the bar, and the message. If you want to see the real man, not the one he shows you, be here. It was a classic manipulation, designed to make her feel she was discovering the truth herself. Against Leo's vehement protests, she insisted on going. She needed to see Michael in his element to understand the pressure he was under. She arrived discreetly, taking a seat in a shadowed booth in the back, her presence unknown to Michael. The meeting started calmly enough. David, jittery and sweating, laid out his story. A failed investment, loan sharks' threats. Michael listened, his face grim. He explained he didn't have that kind of cash, that his own life was in upheaval. He offered to help David find a legitimate way out to go to the police. This was not the reaction the manipulators had hoped for. So David, prompted by his own fear and the subtle pressure from the unseen forces backing his creditors, played his assigned card. His voice turned nasty. "I heard you're rolling in it now, shacking up with some billionaire bitch. You can't spare a few grand for family, for Sarah's brother, after everything we did for you." The word bitch hung in the air. Michael's posture changed instantly from concern to dangerously still. "Don't," he said, his voice low. "You don't get to talk about her. You don't get to drag her into your mess." David, panicking and emboldened by the assumed safety of a public place, pushed harder. "Why, it's true, isn't it? That's where you were the other night, living it up while I'm about to get my knees broken. You owe me, man. You owe our family." He stood up, knocking his chair back, pointing a finger. The few other patrons turned to watch. The scene was escalating perfectly for the hidden observers. From her booth, Isabella felt a cold wash of confusion and hurt. The crude language, the venom, the transactional anger. It was a world away from the quiet, principled man she'd spoken with. This was the chaos her father had warned about. She was seeing the proof, served on a platter. She began to shrink back, feeling naive and foolish. Then it got worse. Two large men who had been playing pool in the corner ambled over. They were the creditors. One put a heavy hand on David's shoulder. "Time up, Dave. You got our money or not?" David, whimpering, pointed at Michael. "He's got it. He's good for it." The thug turned to Michael, looking him up and down with disdain. "That true, pal? You covering your loser friend here?" This was the final piece of the staged humiliation, to make Michael either pay up and look like a patsy or get beaten down in front of Isabella. Either outcome served the Thorns' purpose. Michael stood up slowly. He looked at David, not with anger but with profound disappointment. Then he looked at the two men. "He owes you. I don't. This isn't my business." He turned to leave. One of the men grabbed his arm. "It is now." What happened next occurred in less than 10 seconds. Michael didn't throw a punch. He moved with an efficient, almost clinical speed. A twist, a pressure point applied to the wrist, a sharp shift of balance, and the man who grabbed him was on the floor, groaning, his arm locked in a controlled hold. Michael looked at the second man. "Leave, now." The sheer, calm authority in his voice, so different from the shouted threats they were used to, was more frightening than any bluster. The second man backed away, helping his friend up, and they fled, dragging a sobbing David with them. The bar was silent. Michael took a deep breath, the only sign of the adrenaline coursing through him. He pulled out his wallet, threw a 50 on the table for the disruption, and walked toward the door. It was then that he saw her. Isabella, standing by the booth, her face pale, a mix of fear and awe in her eyes. He stopped, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a weary defeat. He'd been played, and she'd seen the whole ugly show. They drove in silence to a quiet park overlooking the city. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Isabella said, "Who are you, Michael? Really? Because that man in there, that wasn't just a bartender." This was the moment of truth, the moment the trap was designed to create. He could lie and she'd know. He could tell a partial truth and it would sound like an excuse. So he told her everything. He told her about his 4 years in the Marines, about his job as a military police officer, about the training in close quarters combat and de-escalation he'd never wanted to use again after leaving. He told her it was why he could stay calm with the drunk that first night, why he knew how to handle a threat without starting a bar fight. "I left that life to be a father, to be something gentler," he said, his voice raw. "But the world keeps dragging me back into it, and now you've seen it. That's the chaos, that's the mess. It follows me, and your father is right, it will follow me right to your doorstep." Isabella listened, her initial shock metabolizing into something else. She didn't see a violent man. She saw a man who had protected himself without escalating, who had defended his connection to her from a slur, who had a past he was trying to outrun. The calculation in her mind shifted. The trap had backfired. Instead of revealing a fraud, it had revealed a deeper layer of integrity and capability. "They set you up," she said quietly, not a question. "David, those men, the timing. They wanted me to see you break or run or fight. They wanted me to be afraid of your world." Michael nodded. "Probably." Instead of pushing her away, the event did the opposite. It forged a new, fierce alliance. Isabella's sympathy transformed into strategy. "Okay," she said, a new hardness in her eyes. "If they want to play in the shadows, we'll bring everything into the light. But we need leverage they can't ignore." She had an idea, one that was reckless, brilliant, and potentially catastrophic. She would use the one weapon she had that her father couldn't control, her own share of the Thorne legacy. She revealed that on her 25th birthday, she had come into a controlled but substantial independent trust. It was managed by the family office, but the capital was legally hers. The funds were tied up in complex instruments, but there was a clause. She could petition to withdraw a lump sum for a qualified investment in a sustainable enterprise. It was meant for her to buy a boutique hotel or launch a fashion line. She proposed using it for something else, to fully fund Michael's modular housing startup, not as a gift but as a serious equity investment. It would be a legitimate, auditable business transaction, but its real purpose was nuclear. It would legally and publicly entangle their futures. Michael would become her business partner. Attacking him would mean attacking a major investment of a Thorne heir, destabilizing the value of her assets, a move her father's board would never allow. Michael was stunned. "That's insane. It's throwing gasoline on the fire." "No," Isabella countered. "It's building a fire break. He can bully a bartender. He can't bully a business partner of Isabella Thorne without explaining to shareholders why he's sabotaging a profitable venture. We make you untouchable by making you valuable." It was a masterstroke, turning the logic of wealth against itself. They spent the next 72 hours working in secret. Michael, with his old classmates' help, formalized a business plan and prospectus. Isabella's personal lawyer, a woman fiercely loyal to her alone, began the petition to the trust managers. They were building a fortress made of paperwork and precedent. But Robert Thorne and Victor Cross were not idle. Surveillance had shown Isabella and Michael meeting secretly, their demeanor shifting from distress to determined collaboration. They knew a countermove was coming. Victor's team dug deeper, past the military record, into the finer grain of Michael's past, and they found a thread thin but potentially devastating. During his wife's illness, there had been a fellow nurse who had become a close friend, a source of support. In the grief-stricken months after Sarah's death, that friendship had briefly, consensually crossed a line. It lasted weeks before mutual guilt and grief ended it. It was a private moment of human frailty, unknown to anyone but the two of them, or so Michael thought. Victor Cross located the nurse, who had since moved and started a new life. He didn't threaten her, he simply presented facts. Isabella Thorne is becoming emotionally involved with Michael. She sees him as a perfect, tragic hero. If she learns about your connection from him, it's a confession. If she learns about it from the media, sourced to you, it's a betrayal. Your choice is how it comes out. It was psychological torture, designed to force the nurse into a preemptive, damaging statement. She refused to go on record, but the pressure alone was the goal. The mere possibility of this revelation was now a live wire in the game. The trust petition hit the family office like a bomb. Robert Thorne's rage was monumental. He could legally challenge it, but the business case was solid, even visionary from a social impact investing angle. Blocking it would require overt, ugly coercion. exactly the kind of move that could trigger Michael's promised public scandal. For the first time, Robert was checkmated by his daughter's intelligence, not just her defiance. He summoned Isabella to a final meeting. It was not in his office, but in their empty, cavernous family home. He was not shouting, he was quiet, which was more terrifying. You think you've won. You think this business partnership protects him. It only paints a larger target on his past. My people are everywhere, Isabella, and everyone has secrets. What happens when I unveil his? Not with a threat, but with a press release. What happens to your investment, to your noble project, when your partner is revealed to be less a saint and more a flawed man who moved on from your wife rather quickly? He saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes and pressed. Call off the investment. Walk away gracefully, and I will ensure his secrets stay buried. His daughter is left alone, and he can have his small, quiet life. It is the only mercy either of you will get from me. Isabella left the house feeling a cold dread. The goalposts had moved again. The battle was no longer about money or class. It was about character assassination. She needed to talk to Michael to ask him the question her father had planted. But before she could, the live wire touched powder. An obscure but gossipy financial blog published a blind item. It didn't name names, but the details were specific enough. Which suddenly in the news, socially conscious startup founder, celebrated by a certain rebellious heiress, has a complicated past regarding a certain caretaker from his late wife's final days. The walls between grief and comfort are sometimes thin. It was the warning shot. The full story was poised to drop. Michael, seeing the item, knew exactly what it referred to and who had leaked it. The ground beneath their carefully built fortress was turning to quicksand. The private shame he'd carried for years was now a public weapon, aimed directly at the heart of the future they were trying to build. The war had entered its final, most brutal phase, not fighting for a future, but fighting to survive the past. Michael knew he had one chance to control the narrative. He had to tell Isabella everything before the full story exploded. He drove to her apartment, the one she kept separate from the family penthouse. He didn't call. He just showed up, his face etched with a grim resolve. When she opened the door, he saw the blog post open on her tablet behind her. She looked at him, her expression unreadable, a fortress of her own. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice flat. He didn't try to soften it. Yes, 6 months after Sarah died. Her name was Chloe. She was the hospice nurse. We were both drowning in the same grief. It lasted a few weeks. It was a mistake born from sorrow, not malice. It ended because it felt like a betrayal of Sarah's memory. I've carried the shame of it every day since. I should have told you. Isabella absorbed this, turning away to look out at the city. My father said you moved on quickly, that you weren't the grieving saint I imagined. Michael stepped into the room. I never claimed to be a saint. I was a broken man trying to breathe. That doesn't excuse it, but it's the truth. And if you need to walk away because of it, I'll understand. I'll even tell the press it's true to spare you the drama. But I won't let your father use my pain as a weapon against you. Isabella turned back to him, and he saw tears in her eyes, but also a flicker of the same steel she'd shown in the bar. He didn't tell me to warn me. He told me to control me, to make me see you as flawed so I'd return to his perfect, flawlessly curated world. But his world is built on secrets 1,000 times worse, buried by lawyers and payoffs. She took a deep breath. I'm not walking away, but we're not playing defense anymore. We're taking this public on our terms. What happened next was a masterclass in modern crisis management. Instead of hiding, Isabella called her personal publicist, not the family, but a woman known for handling sensitive celebrity cases. They drafted a statement, but not from Isabella, from Michael. It would be published on a reputable platform, a first-person essay. Michael spent the next 12 hours writing, digging into a pain he'd buried for years. He wrote about his wife's illness, the helplessness, the debt, the crushing grief. He wrote about the profound loneliness after her death and the human mistake he made in seeking comfort. He didn't paint himself as a hero. He painted himself as a flawed, grieving man. He ended the essay with a clear, defiant statement. My past is not a secret. It is a story, and it is mine to tell. My focus now is on the future, on my daughter, and on building something of substance with someone who sees the man I am trying to be, not the ghost of who I was. Isabella simultaneously activated the investment. Her lawyer filed an injunction against the family office, arguing that delaying the trust disbursement was a bad faith act damaging her financial interests. The business prospectus was leaked to a major financial newspaper, framing Rowan Modular Solutions as a groundbreaking social enterprise. The narrative in the media began to pivot, subtly but decisively. It was no longer just a salacious heiress and bartender scandal. It was a story about redemption, about second chances, about using capital for social good against the wishes of an old guard patriarch. The public, which loves a good rebellion, started to side with them. Robert Thorne was caught off guard. The weapon he'd unveiled had been taken from his hand and turned into a tool for their solidarity. The full, nasty story about Michael and the nurse never ran. No reputable outlet would touch it now that it was framed as a heartless invasion of a widower's grief. The board of the family trust, wary of bad publicity and potential lawsuits, pressured Robert to approve Isabella's investment. The money was released. But Robert Thorne was not a man who surrendered. He launched a final, direct assault. He invited Michael alone to the Thorne Industries headquarters. It was not a request. In the stark, imposing conference room, Robert didn't mention the past. He presented a new deal, a clean, simple buyout. $5 million, cash, for you to walk away from my daughter and dissolve this company. You take the money, you settle your debts, you set up a college fund for your daughter, you buy a nice house. You live a comfortable, quiet life. All you have to do is break her heart once cleanly. Tell her you can't handle the pressure. She'll recover, and you'll have security for life. This is the only good offer you will ever get. Michael looked at the wire transfer form on the table. It was more money than he could ever dream of. It would solve every practical problem forever. He picked up the pen. Robert allowed himself a small, victorious smile. Then Michael slowly, deliberately turned the form over and wrote on the blank back. He slid it back. He had written a number, 0. The price for my daughter's respect is higher than that. The price for my own is even higher. I don't want your money, Mr. Thorne. I never did. I just wanted to be left alone to build a life. You forced me to build a bigger one. Thank you for that. He stood up and left the room. It was the final, definitive rejection of the world of transactions. The fallout was immediate and permanent. Isabella, upon hearing of the attempted buyout, cut all formal ties with the family office. She moved her remaining assets to a new firm. She and Michael officially launched Rowan Modular Solutions. The first project was a partnership with the city to build 20 affordable, sustainable homes in a neglected neighborhood. The groundbreaking ceremony was a media event. Isabella and Michael stood together, not holding hands for the cameras but standing as partners. In his speech, Michael thanked his late wife, Sarah, for teaching him about resilience and his daughter, Lily, for giving him a reason to build. He did not mention the Thornes. In the crowd, watching from the back, was Leo, the bodyguard. He had resigned from Thorne Security the week before. He now worked for a private firm, and Isabella was his first client. His loyalty had shifted, not out of romance, but out of respect for the principal who had finally decided who she was. The final surprise came not from the couple, but from an unexpected quarter. 2 months after the launch, Robert Thorne suffered a minor heart attack. It was stress-related. During his recovery away from the pressures of the empire, he was visited only by his wife and his lawyers. Isabella sent flowers but did not visit. The message was clear. The dynasty would continue, but the personal war was over. He had lost his daughter not to a gold digger, but to her own principled stand. In a quiet, unpublicized move, Thorne Industries later made a sizable, anonymous donation to the Urban Development Fund backing Rowan Modular's second project. It was not an apology. It was a surrender, coded as an investment. 1 year to the day after the night in the last call, Michael and Isabella were not married. They were not engaged. They were in the living room of a modest but bright house in a neighborhood that was being rebuilt, one of their own units. Lily was asleep upstairs. They were reviewing blueprints for their third development. Isabella looked up from the plans. Do you ever miss it? The simplicity of just being a bartender. Michael smiled, a real, easy smile that had become more frequent. Every shift. But then I remember I was just serving drinks. Now I'm helping build homes, and I get to do it with you. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was a hard one beginning. The heiress had not been rescued by the bartender. Together, they had rescued each other from the prisons of their predetermined lives. The bodyguard wasn't stunned anymore. He was just at work, ensuring the two people he protected could build their future in peace. The story that began with a refusal to leave a dive bar ended with a conscious decision to build something new, on their own terms. So what is the real story here? It's not a fairy tale where love conquers all. It's a blueprint, a map of what happens when the invisible walls we build between ourselves, walls of money, class, and expectation, are challenged not by grand rebellion but by a simple, stubborn act of human recognition. Isabella Thorne didn't fall for a bartender. She connected with a person whose kindness was given freely, without agenda, in a world where every interaction she had was a transaction. Michael didn't seek an heiress. He met a woman who saw past his scars and his debt to the man still trying to build something good. Their story is a modern fable about leverage, but not the financial kind. It's about the leverage of authenticity against manipulation, of transparency against secrets, of building something new against the pressure to conform. They won not by becoming more like the world that opposed them, but by becoming more fully themselves. Michael leveraged his skill and his story. Isabella leveraged her capital and her voice. Together, they created a joint venture of the heart that was, ironically, too financially and publicly sound to destroy. The bodyguard, Leo, who began the story as an agent of control, ended it as a guardian of their hard-won peace. His shifted loyalty is the ultimate symbol of the change that occurred. Even the machinery of wealth, when faced with genuine conviction, can recalibrate. Robert Thorne's anonymous donation was the white flag of a system that realized total war was more costly than acceptance. This narrative echoes a pattern centuries old, from the American heiresses who traded dollars for ducal titles to the modern couples navigating the silent codes of class. Research shows these relationships thrive not by ignoring the divide, but by openly acknowledging it, communicating through the friction, and finding a shared purpose that transcends background. Isabella and Michael found that purpose in brick and mortar and social impact, building literal homes while building a metaphorical one together. The lingering question isn't whether they'll live happily ever after. It's whether we still believe that the most valuable connections are the ones that make the least sense on paper. In an algorithm-driven world that tries to match us with perfect compatibility scores, their story is a testament to the beautiful, chaotic human magic of imperfect fits. It suggests that sometimes, the person who can save you isn't a knight on a white horse, but the one who simply sees you, truly sees you, across a crowded, dimly lit room and offers a moment of peace. It asks us to consider the walls in our own lives, the unspoken rules, the social barriers, the expectations we inherit. And it whispers a challenge. What would happen if, just once, you refused to leave without the thing that felt real, no matter how out of place it seemed? The world might try to stun you into compliance, but you might just build something new. Subscribe if you believe the most powerful forces in the world aren't money or power, but kindness, courage, and the refusal to leave a fallen dream behind.